Now, I'll be honest, this was a difficult speech to write because while we spent a lot of money producing this data, for me, I really think about the big picture, and what matters in the big picture is the story that this tells. I really want the good news to make you happy and the bad news to get you angry enough that you're inspired to take action, because to move the needle will require us to work hard, work smart, and work together. And I'm going to start off a little personal because accessibility is personal. It affects all of us sooner or later. So I want you to understand the motivation behind the SOAR report. I want you to get the big picture. And so this is my personal journey that led to the report, and most importantly, what comes after seeing the results. So I don't know what motivates you, but family is really what motivates me. And you come to appreciate it when you face challenges. On the left, bottom left, is my dad, who survived the concentration camps. He was a brilliant man. He spoke 10 different languages and commanded respect when he walked in the room. Next to him is my mom, and she was hidden in France during World War II by a Christian family. And if you've read the Anne Frank story, you essentially know my mom's story, except that my mom made it out. And then above my parents is my brother, and my brother took care of my dad when my dad got the cancer that was to take his life. And he took care of my mom when dementia took her brain. And so, you know, what really founded GAD was what happened to my dad, which I'll tell you soon. And my mom was a part of this too. So I'm going to share all of that with you. But in reality, the story begins with the civil rights movement. And here is a picture of the Capitol crawl. Wheelchair users, including young kids, got out of their wheelchairs to demand their rights. They crawled up the steps of the Capitol, requesting that there's a civil rights law written, the Americans with Disabilities Act, and it was successful. More about that later. Now, my life intersected with civil rights when it affected my dad. And I'd like to take a moment to describe a bit about what civil rights are in case anybody doesn't really have a clear idea. Now, if you have a disability, you are required to pay your taxes, as you should be. And I'll just tell you a story of a Karen Rose from Berkeley who is blind and who was fined $1,500 for being late on her taxes. However, the letters that she got were not in Braille. And so she appealed to the IRS saying, I should not have to pay this fine because you didn't send it to me in a manner that I could read it. And she was denied. So she's being punished for their inaccessibility, and that's obviously wrong, and it's a civil right. A similar issue would be if the IRS building provided no ramps for wheelchair users. So with respect to my dad, his banking website was inaccessible, and there's a certain loss of dignity when you cannot bank, because being independent means being able to bank. And it got me upset enough that I wrote this blog post. I have a screenshot here of a post that says, "Challenge, accessibility know-how needs to go mainstream with developers now." And this launched Global Accessibility Awareness Day. I know many of you are aware of it, but for those that aren't aware, I'm going to just share a little bit about GAD, Global Accessibility Awareness Day. We call it GAD for short, just so that you get an idea of how this grew and why this led to the SOAR report. So we started off strong. The celebrity Stephen Fry tweeted out GAD. The Indian government made an official event, and it even was syndicated in a story in Canada and made my hometown paper. This was year one. And unfortunately, a few months before year two happened, my dad passed away. I was and remain heartbroken about it, but GAD always gives me, all these talks give me an opportunity to remember and to honor my parents. Nonetheless, year two, the show must go on, and we already got to a tweet a minute on the GAD hashtag. And the bank that inspired my blog post, they reached out to us and told us that they're aware that they have big issues with their accessibility, and they're doing an internal event. So this already impacted the bank that inspired this event, and I never publicly mention their name, and I never will, but it just brings chills down my spine how the community can create a movement that has such an impact. Then by year 4, the GAD hashtag is officially trending on Twitter, and now Twitter even makes a special logo for it. Year 5, Apple took it to another level by doing an event at every Apple store all week. And here is a screenshot of their CEO, Tim Cook, hugging Stevie Wonder, who did a concert on the Apple campus for GAD. Not to be outdone, Microsoft one year, they had a seminal moment when they released the Xbox Adaptive Controller that was really a game changer for gamers who have a disability. And then one last thing I'll mention is that the big tech companies started to change their homepages for accessibility on the day. But in life, reality always rears its ugly head. This is a picture, the last picture of my mom before she passed on the 9th GAD, a half hour after I dedicated it to her. And I like to think of it, you know, GAD was always about my dad. And in the ninth one, my mom was like, it's about me too. And, you know, she had dementia. We felt it, you know, my brother had the bulk of taking care of her, but obviously we both helped. And you can't understand the importance of accessibility, but also taking care of people until you go through this experience, which unfortunately too many of us have to do, almost every one of us do. So anyway, I dedicated the 9th GAD to her, and she passed away a half an hour later. But also, I want to add that the success of GAD is not celebrated by everyone, and there is a satire account called The Blind Onion, and they tweeted out something that would turn out for me to be as big a deal as GAD itself. And what they tweeted was, the world eagerly anticipates participating in the next 364 days of global accessibility oblivion. I have no idea who's behind this account, by the way, to this day. Nobody's reached out to me, but I was told, you know what, GAD is such a big success. Please do not take this in a negative way. But in fact, it kind of hurt. And the reason it hurt was because I saw that it came out of pain, and it kind of shocked me and into thinking, well, are we really making a difference? You know, is this making any difference at all? And so I used that as a motivation. And I had just seen a movie called Pink Ribbons. And I didn't want GAD to turn into the accessibility version of pinkwashing. Now, those of you who saw the documentary know what I'm talking about, but those that didn't, pinkwashing is essentially about what happened to the movement of breast cancer awareness. And whether it's true or not, the contention of the documentarians was that there's a lot of money in PR all about breast cancer with pink ribbons. And if I remembered it correctly, the outcomes got even worse for breast cancer. And so they were really questioning whether all of this stuff was about PR and if the money was really useful or not. Regardless, from my perspective, I wanted to make sure that GAD was not like pinkwashing, where everybody was celebrating it, but nobody was doing anything about it. So I don't want this to just be about PR. I want it to make a difference. Before I go to the next part of the story, let me just share what was going on my professional side of my life. Back in 2008, I was hired to rebuild AmericanIdol.com. And that really changed my life, because a few years later, I co-founded Diamond, a digital agency, with the same folks that I met that were really kicked ass, the same folks I met working on American Idol. And then years later, I got into GAD because I didn't know much about accessibility other than that blog post I wrote where I realized that we've got to bring up the awareness. I myself did not have enough awareness. So eventually we were able to really build up an accessibility, portion of the company and really transform the entire company into an accessible one. And this also allowed us to invest in research. So you can't improve what you don't measure. And again, in order to answer the question, was GAD making a difference? I felt that we needed research. We needed to get a baseline of where is accessibility, and then trend lines to see if we're making a difference or not. And that's how important this is to me. So this year, or really it was last year, the end of the year, we released the 3rd annual State of Accessibility report. In the first 2 years, we collaborated with WebAIM because they had the same idea just a little bit ahead of me, but they also had the Wave tool. So Jared Smith over at WebAIM just did an amazing job. And in his WebAIM Million report, he came out with some numbers, and they're not encouraging. The data has been gathered 3 times, 2019, 2020, and 2021. And the percentage of pages with detectable WCAG, Web Content Accessibility Guideline errors, was 97.8% in 2019. It went up in 2020 to 98.1%, and then went down 97.4%. And it's one thing to say that there is an error on the page, but it's another how many errors there are. It's a really important statistic. And the average number of errors in 2019 were 59.6. They went up to 60.9, and thank God in 2021, they went down to 51.4. So we do have a bit of an answer there. I mean, a big part of the answer, which is that the web is not very accessible. So in order to really try and get the trends, we can't look at the top 1,000,000 websites. It's just too large of a data set. But we were able to detect patterns by looking at the top 100 sites. And so for 3 years now, we've been doing an Alexa top 100 website testing. I'll share a bit about the methodology. When it came to the web, we performed screen reader usability testing. We tested the registration, login, and log out of the top 100. And if the process was easy to do with a screen reader, it was graded accessible. If it was doable but difficult, it was graded as accessible with difficulty. So for example, if you needed to search for form elements to proceed because the register or login button or link didn't have focus, that would be something where you could figure it out, but it was accessible with difficulty. And then if it failed the process, including the login and log out, it was deemed inaccessible. And the thought here is, if you can't register for a site, but the rest of the site is usable, but you really have like a registration in order to buy a product or something like that, it's not really accessible. So we're kind of looking through that user journey. And the technology we used was VoiceOver on Safari and Mac OS Big Sur, NVDA on Firefox and Windows 10, and JAWS on Internet Explorer 11 and Windows 10. So the results this year of that web testing was 62% accessible, 9% accessible with difficulty, and 29% inaccessible. So that essentially means 71%, accessible to some degree, right? And in order to compare that, again, we're kind of looking at the trend lines. You need a 3-year comparison, and just taking that top level of accessible without difficulty. From 2019, it was 29%. Then it went up 11% to 40% in 2020, and then it went up 22% to 62% in 2021. Those that can only hear my voice, what I'm just saying is that accessible without difficulty just in 2019 was at 29%, and now we're at 62%. So we're seeing a really big and positive trend line at the top end of the spectrum, at the very top website. So that's really a positive development. Now we can ask ourselves what caused the improvement, and we can't prove it, but internally we've thought a fair bit about it, and our feeling is that COVID-19 had a fair bit to do with it. And it really disrupted the usual way of doing business. From banking to schooling to remote working, everything went online. And so what you wind up seeing is remote tools like WeTransfer, Zoom, and Slack joined the Alexa 100, and it replaced some other websites that were less accessible. So you might make the case that accessibility, it might be more likely to put you in that top 100 because you are reaching a larger audience. And another little bit of proof here is that those remote tools improve their automated captions and other other accessibility aspects soon after COVID happened. So clearly they're seeing a massive customer demand. And one other indication is also that USPS, FedEx, and UPS made it into the list as well. So obviously there is an impact there of COVID-19. We also did some automated testing to complement the manual testing, and we used the Axe add-on for Chrome to check for the valid document lang attribute. None of them had missing lang attributes. All pages passed. That was pretty cool. Then, as expected, ARIA was a bit of a problem. 97% of the pages had an error had errors, and there was an average of 11.6 instances per page. In terms of sufficient color contrast, 67% of pages had errors, and there was an average of 22.7 failures. Buttons and links having text labels, 43% had errors for an average of 6 instances per page, and alt text, 24% had errors for an average of 2.7 errors per page. And then finally, input labels, 11% had errors for an average of 0.2 labels missing per page. Then we realized that there have been many studies when it comes to web accessibility, but not really any comparable studies for mobile accessibility. So we decided to test for that as well. And that's, we did a lot of testing. There's a lot of detail here, and I kind of don't want to dive into too many details because you can just download the report yourself and then hit us up with any questions. And the URL for that, by the way, is diamond.la/SOAR. But essentially, we tested the top free and paid iOS and Android apps. In certain cases, we tested for the registration and used the same idea as we did for the Alexa Top 100, where we categorized it by accessible, accessible with difficulty, and inaccessible. And we used VoiceOver on iPhone 12 with iOS 15 and TalkBack on Samsung Galaxy 6 with Android 11. We also did manual testing of both registration and home screens for free and paid apps for the following criteria: orientation upon rotating device, text resize, alt text, and do screen readers identify headings. So in the free mobile app testing with screen readers, both iOS and Android performed relatively well. Android edged out iOS, but in all cases, we saw a little bit better in some cases iOS, a little better some cases in Android. When it came to the free iOS apps, we saw 65% accessible, 10% accessible with difficulties, and 25% inaccessible. With the free Android apps, we were at 75% accessible, 5% accessible with difficulties, and 20% inaccessible. But then we went into manual testing of, well, we also did manual testing of free mobile apps, but that was almost perfect. Like they were well over 90% when it came to testing for orientation, text resize, alt text, and headings. But when it came to the paid mobile apps, there was a massive drop off. And over there on the paid iOS app side, and this is the top, so these are the top apps, only 35% of iOS passed, 65% failed. And on the Android apps, 29% passed and 71% failed. So the real takeaway from that is that paid apps, the accessibility drops off, and our assumption is that it's because they're smaller publishers. The top tech companies tended to have these free apps because they have other ways of monetizing, and they have the funds to really spend to make sure that everything is accessible. So outside the top tech companies, like we saw with WebAIM, accessibility is not very good. Still better than it was on the web, but it's still not very good. We also tested the main feature. So let's say it was video or whatever the case may be, we looked at the main feature and did screen reader testing on iOS and Android for both the top free and paid apps. And what we found there is that on the free iOS apps, we're at 80% passed, 20% failed. Android free apps, 65% passed, 35% failed. On the paid iOS apps, and again, this is paid, only 10% passed and 90% failed. And then on the paid Android apps, 40% passed and 60% failed. So these are In some cases, good news, in some cases, bad news, but the key takeaways are that the top tech companies are improving accessibility considerably. And this is a big relief to me because it's not a pink ribbon situation. So I'm very happy to at least see some good news. And iOS and Android both have their strengths and weaknesses, but they both do comparably well when you're looking at the big tech apps. And at least there is some guidance and ability to build accessible apps. But both on the web and mobile, we have an enormous drop-off in accessibility as soon as we go beyond big tech into the Fortune 500 enterprise companies, let alone the general worldwide web and mobile app market. I need to add one more thing for us to get an accurate state of accessibility, and that is accessibility lawsuits. I thought about giving statistics, but in reality, there's two outfits that do this work. One is SafeRShot and the other is UsableNet. And the numbers vary a little bit, and it's not really that important, and I'll tell you why. But first, I'll just say that back in 2017, we saw a report of 814 lawsuits. Depending who you look at, it went as high as 4,055 in 2021. But in reality, it scratches the surface of what's really going on. None of these statistics include out-of-court settlements and threatened lawsuits. And those are rampant, especially in Florida, New York, and California, which have strong civil rights statutes. And that means if the defendant loses, they pay attorney's fees for the plaintiff. That's why they're really popular in those states. Now I'm going to talk about overlays, and that triggers folks. So I'm a little wary about saying it, but maybe it's a little controversial. But one overlay vendor raised a large round of money from venture capitalists, and they came out promising that AI fixes everything. And the community really jumped down their throats, and rightly so, because it's not that easy to make things accessible. But in their rebuttals, they did make one really good point. And not that I want to give credit to overlay vendors, but we have to be honest about where we are, because we're not going to fix it if we don't. And what they said is that our industry has spent decades trying to educate the world about accessibility. And one of our own, WebAIM, comes out with a report that just shows 3% of websites accessible. And they're right about that. Their solution doesn't make it any better, for sure, but they're right. We're only at 3%. And that's really what the SOAR report tried to answer. And that's completely unacceptable. And we really have to do more. And my goal with all of this is not to wade into the details of the report, but to understand where we are. Because if we know the problems, then we're going to try and fix them. And I've spent a lot of time thinking about this. And obviously the next step is the Fortune 500. So at Diamond, our client base is enterprise companies. We build software, and now we're building software accessibly by default. There are no agencies of our size, which is about 100 people, offering accessibility by default and really putting that strong of an emphasis on it. There are a good number of accessibility companies that perform audits, and they'll also help with remediation to one degree or another. And there are agencies whose salespeople will claim that they can build an accessible app or website, but it's really a crapshoot. I know for sure that there are some that do it and that can do it. They won't do it, by default. So when you look at the situation, and there's probably thousands and thousands of agencies, the Fortune 500 is underserved by their agencies when it comes to accessibility. And I thought, once we came out there and showed that there was one company that really, stressed on this and would build accessibly by default, it would really show, it would unleash like a massive demand, because I thought that companies would want it. But the reality is they're not asking for it. And it's actually making it harder to sell. Because we bake it into all of our proposals, we require it. We're not going to build it if we can't make it accessible. But the reality is that we've done an analysis of this, and accessibility. Probably I shouldn't be saying this, but why not? It's only brought us like 3% of our business. Accessibility is really not in that much demand. And so this is, and I'm sorry, I don't want to come in and give a talk and be depressing, but the reality is that the Fortune 500 isn't asking for it today. Now, I'm not giving up. I still believe that the market is there, but it kind of reminds me of Shark Tank, because in Shark Tank, you'll see entrepreneurs come in and they will have a product that's difficult to explain, and they typically won't invest because they'll say that we have to educate the market. And that's the reality, and it's an expensive and difficult proposition, but I'm determined to do it. But in the bigger picture, I just want to solve the whole problem. So everything I'm saying, it just sounds kind of dire, but at the same time, I'm always hopeful. I'm always optimistic. GAD has proven that you come in with, first of all, with some good vision, with a good idea, you identify a problem, and you can make a difference. And so I want to share what I'm going to do about it, and I'm going to ask you what you're going to do about it, and maybe even ask you for some help so that we do something about it. So first of all, on a personal level, as most of you know, Jennison Asuncion is my co-founder of GAD, and last year we launched the GAD Foundation, and I will be working on that until my dying day. And our mission is to change the culture of digital product development to include accessibility. And I'm really excited. We have lots of different ideas and programs. Personally, I'm really excited by the GAD Pledge, which is where open source frameworks take a pledge to make their projects accessible. Because the open source frameworks are used by millions of developers and they affect billions of users, and they're very influential to the culture. So we just need to get that top layer, and we'll make a massive difference, both in terms of the products that are used by the masses, but also in influencing the culture. We also need to go after the coding schools, because they are still teaching divs and spans, which make things inaccessible. But I don't want to bring this like negativity into this whole thing without really thinking about what is the big solution here that's going to make a difference. And it's a challenge, but we can all have the biggest impact if we do one thing, which is lobby the Department of Justice. It might sound silly, but the reality is that the ADA has made a huge difference when it comes to building buildings. You have to have a ramp whenever you're doing some kind of construction where there are steps, you need to have a ramp, and that's part of the ADA. But the reason that it's not as effective when it comes to websites and mobile apps is that the ADA was passed in 1990 before websites and mobile apps were in much use. And so there's some murkiness in the law. And so you have to go to court in order to say, hey, you are breaking my civil rights. And so the courts have been ruling in favor of saying that the Americans with Disabilities Act applies to digital products, but the defendants, right now, they have a viable defense in that the ADA does not call out digital products, and the Department of Justice has not provided guidance on how to make a website or app accessible. President Obama promised to do it and kind of got started on doing the guidance, but he didn't finish it. Trump killed whatever efforts were brought in by President Obama, and President Biden promised it and is doing a little bit of work. There's a letter that 181 advocacy groups wrote to the Department of Justice, but the experts are saying that this is not likely to happen in the next 3 years. And that is very upsetting, because this is something that the current administration has as a priority, and we need to apply pressure. So whoever is listening to this, if you want to know what's going to really move the needle, it's getting the Department of Justice to make a change and to specify specifically that the ADA refers to digital products and that the web content accessibility guidelines are the rules that people have to follow. Once that happens, all of this work that all of us in the accessibility community are doing is going to move the needle, because everybody knows there's not going to be any viable defense. And then all this, like the foundations that we've built, will really start to mean something, rather than just that 3% that we seem to be hitting. That's really some of the folks that care, and then some of the folks that get sued. this is what I'm going to focus on. I think that we need to lobby. I think we probably need some powerful lobbies to work on this. And I'm sharing this with all of you because maybe somebody here that's listening to this knows this world, knows the world of lobbying, maybe has some connections, or maybe we can just together put a lot more pressure on it, but be it in social media or whatever your sphere of influence is. And so I'm going to work on it. I hope that some of you work on it and that we all turn this around, and that I won't have to keep doing these that I don't have to do any kind of SOAR report, because we will see the improvement and we can have a much happier keynote. Thank you.
Oh, Joe, great thoughts, great perspective from you. I appreciate you sharing that with the team. And we've got some questions that have come in for Joe. If you've got some additional questions, go ahead and type those in the QA chat. We'll definitely get to those, Joe. But a lot of response to your talk. So thanks for taking that time and sharing not only the response from the reports, but I think we have action items that each of us can take home with us, Joe. So thanks for challenging us to do something about the environment we live in too. So the first question, Joe, and I'm not sure this is true, but one of the participants wanted to ask just about the voluntary product accessibility templates. We both know that a lot of companies come out with VPATs and say, this is how accessible our product is. And then, of course, as you mentioned, Diamond did their assessment as well. Had you done any comparison between what a company had said, how accessible their product is versus what you found in your studies?
No, we haven't. And honestly, we're still figuring out what is the best thing that we should be testing. We actually got some criticism that we were a little too screen reader focused, but these things take time to really build up and understand the best way to test. Not to mention the fact that, it's just one of these projects that you're really trying to do to improve the industry. And so you don't necessarily have the full time and attention that you need to focus on it. But as long as we keep improving it, I feel like that's what matters the most. But this is a great idea. I'll definitely note it down.
Well, I appreciate it, Joe. Thanks. Great question. Another person, and I agree with this person. Thank you for sharing your passion around GAD and the story about GAD. That's very, as someone who's celebrated GAD, I didn't know the background, and thank you for sharing that story. That is very powerful. But this person wants to ask your opinion, Joe, on they're in a university, and of course, GAD falls in the summer when the facility and the students vacate campus. Do you have any ideas on how you would recommend higher ed celebrates GAD in a meaningful way? And the fact that they do have tomorrow's leaders there that they can help understand accessibility. So ideas from you.
Yes, absolutely. I'm going to do a shout out to my buddy, Jeremy Seda from the North Idaho College, because he created an event, and I think I don't think he would mind if we kind of share the branding. It was something like the Path to GAD or the Road to GAD. And he does the event a few months earlier when it makes sense for the calendar. And I think that's a good path for universities to do, so that they're not running into trouble with their timing. So Jeremy Seda, North Idaho College, hit him up or hit me up if you want more details on that.
Thanks, Joe. I mean, it's a great way to make it, as you said, not about the day itself, but it's one of those things that we think about and progress for any time, 365 days out of the year. Another question that we got, in your opinion, Joe, what do you think is the biggest disconnect between accessibility implementation being put out versus what is required or needed? So, we have those where some companies might look at it as a checkbox versus this is what people really need for things to be accessible. Is there a disconnect there? And if so, where do you see that happening?
I'd say, let me think about this a second.
Yeah,
so
no worries.
essentially, when you're introduced to this because you've gotten sued, you're already in the wrong mindset, because you're just viewing this as something that's annoying. I think that the big problem is that we need to educate and you can't educate until you have an incentive to educate. So there's a passion that comes from the end users, but it doesn't quite hit folks. And when I can easily like educate somebody that's in front of me, that's passionate, that is a developer or is a designer, and I'll share with them. And I tell this to everybody because this is an easy one that anybody can say, and it will get designers jazzed up. When you are sitting there and you're designing something like Skype or some kind of chat app, and you have this common pattern where you're doing online, offline indicator, if you know accessibility, then you know that you need to put some text or some kind of visual indication, and you cannot only use color to indicate a status. So when you go online, offline, you typically will use red or green, and there's a lot of folks who are colorblind, and for them, they're seeing gray and gray. When you tell this to a designer, the light bulb goes off in their mind, and they're like, oh my God, I love my design team. We can't hire enough people that have accessibility know-how. We have to educate them, which is another thing that makes it hard, right? But you should see their excitement when you share that with them. They love our accessibility team because they're showing them things that they didn't know, and they're improving their craft. And they're like, you know what? For a company, it costs so much more if they get sued, or if they have so many colorblind users that tell them that they need to fix this, but it costs $0 when it's still in the designer's mind. And so when you share that story, you're all of a sudden converting a designer into an accessibility advocate.
Yeah.
But again, I keep coming back to this. This is the same thing you have to teach your customers, right? That you're de-risking, if you just look at it from a business perspective, you're de-risking your product, because it's not only about lawsuits, it's also that your users will be able to use it, because all of your people, they will have the craft of designing things well, right? And so all of these things are just take a lot of work. And the reason I harp on the Department of Justice thing is that if everybody is required to do this, then all of the people that are teaching others are going to have to pick up what we in the accessibility community already know. And they will do it. It will change the entire industry overnight. All this hard work will have been worth it. But until we have that, it's just a bunch of advocates trying to make a difference, right?
And it's that legal precedence. Is that why you think a lot of companies are not asking for accessibility? Do you think that driver's not there for them to start talking about it? Or do you think there's other things that are causing that to happen?
Well, just think of it from the perspective of construction. To this day, if you speak to folks that have to build sidewalks or stairs or whatever, and they also have to do a ramp, they're always looking at that bottom line, and they're going to say, where can I save money? And even though there's a law there about the ramps, they will do anything they can to not build that ramp, but they have no choice because it's in the law, right? And so it just provided that impetus that now you can't study architecture without understanding the ADA. It's just part and parcel of it. And what I'm trying to do is get us to the point where the culture of software, of digital product development, because it's not just software, it's not just developers, it's designers, it's product people, it's everybody in this ecosystem has got to understand it, but they need to be forced to understand it before they will teach it. I think they'll appreciate what they learn as a result of it. They're going to make much better products as a result of it, but they need that stick before the carrot, because the carrot's not moving the needle enough. So
you talked about, and I again appreciate you sharing the history of the DOJ and their guidance. And you mentioned about the Obama administration making it a priority, the Trump administration coming in and deprioritizing that. One of the questions that came in is, do you think, what's the danger in politicizing accessibility? Do you think it's been politicized, or do you think by pushing the DOJ, it's more of a neutral position that we're just trying to make it important to our government as a whole? How do you feel about that?
I love that question so much, because I don't think we should. I think it's politicized, but I don't think we should politicize it. The ADA was passed by President Bush in 1990, right? So, accessibility, disability, it affects everybody. both sides, all sides, right? There's no reason that this needs to be political. And I think that any administration that wants to pass it, I would embrace it. I think all of us would embrace it. And you know, the Biden administration has said coming in that they are going to prioritize it, but the experts are saying that it's not going to happen in 3 years. So who knows? Regardless of what the next administration looks like, we just don't know what they're going to prioritize. So we've got 3 years to fight like the devil to get this passed, and then who knows what comes after. Let's do it. Let's do it within these 3 years. I'm working on it.
Yeah. And it's something that, again, action we can take as individuals to just show it's important to people, not to a party, right? And I think that's a great point to make as well. It's to depoliticize it and just say, this is about people. And that's how you opened your comments. And I think that's a great thing to remember. So Joe, in the EU, they're starting to collect a lot of data. In fact, we have a participant here in Europe. They're gathering huge amounts of data about web. You've got 3 years under your belt with this report, and this person was just wondering from their own position, what do you think are the 2-3 most impactful measurements you've found so far that you present in your reports that really get people to pay attention? Is there certain statistics that you've brought to other people that they've gone, wow, I never thought of it that way? Very similar to what you talked about, letting designers know about the color.
Yeah. I wouldn't say that it came out of the statistics, right? At the end of the day, it's like, honestly, we're grasping for straws to see some positive messages, right? You know, working with WebAIM, you look at that 97, 98 number, goes up and down 0.5% here and there. That's pretty rough, right? And so it's like, okay, well, at least we were able to find that the top tech companies are improving things. And hopefully it's not just because of COVID. Hopefully we're going to keep seeing that trend improve. But no, I wouldn't. I'm sorry. I would love to say yes, but no, I wouldn't say there was anything there that was like, oh, wow, you know.
That's the one. That's the one you need to collect, right? It's more of a general. So good. This person brings up an interesting question. I mean, you talked a lot about teaching the new generation, teaching the current tech body more about accessibility. And this person brings a question from the browser point of side, right? So browsers can make anything bad code. How do you feel about approaching the browser vendors to actually make an effort to make WCAG invalid code? Very similar to what you said about ARIA, right? There's a lot of ARIA problems out there. How do you feel about people advocating to the browsers to say, hey, this is something that should be interpreted differently, per se?
I love that idea so much that I actually tried to get browser makers together a few times and was unsuccessful. But you know, there's just only so much you can do, and there's always a new idea. So thanks for reminding me of that. And if there's any browser makers listening, let's do a little. What we're going to do is something like a little bit of a summit, just with the browser vendors, get a little bit of work under the belt, and then kind of go public with it. But it never really got under the ground. The person that was connecting me up got a little bit busy. But I'd love that idea. Let's do that, or let somebody else do that. Like if somebody has the connections, please do it. Happy to help.
So Joe, the one thing I've really appreciated about your conversation today was your self-advocacy, right? How you took it, you didn't wait for someone to take that mantle and run with it. You said, you know what, I'm somebody who can do something about this. Let me see what change I can make in the world. And somebody asks, just based on your experience, Joe, is there any tips on how we can do more in large scale advocacy work within their own companies, right? Because we all have this sphere of influence. What suggestions would you have somebody who would want to do very similar to what you've tried to do on a worldwide scale within a corporation themselves?
Yeah, it's not just on the worldwide, it's just everybody around you, right? GAD was a blog post on MySQL Talk. That is a blog that probably has been read by 10 people before that date and turned into this crazy viral event. You'd be amazed how just advocating with whoever, you won't believe what it can turn into. If you have that vision, show people the vision, show people the passion, maybe blog it out, and you might hit a global movement, but it's great to start locally inside your company. And you can tell, I mean, it's kind of funny because we're one of the few organizations, certainly digital agencies, that from the top down, it's all about accessibility. And in the hiring, everybody knows, okay, you're a company that wants to do accessibility. So they'll all tell you that they care about accessibility. But the real trick in the interviewing is to talk to them and really see if this is a passion or not. Because the people that are passionate, eventually it'll come through, right? So try and talk to the people that you can tell have that passion, and then educate them and work with them. Maybe even start a little bit of a working group within the company. Like, hey, here's this volunteer accessibility group, or hey, I'd like to be, what do they call it? Like an accessibility advocate on this team. Like let folks know, like gather a group of people in different divisions and say, hey, I'll volunteer, or maybe, switch it off. Maybe this month I'll volunteer, somebody will do it another month, and get that started internally in your organization. And you'd be surprised what that grows into.
Yeah. Passion can get caught very easily, right? That if you have passion, people won't wonder why, hey, Joe, why are you so passionate about this? And you can share your story. I know you mentioned the DOJ. Someone did have a question about, is there any specific bills existing or in the works to add digital accessibility into ADA? And if so, are legislators working on it, or is it's stuck in the executive office? So are you aware of any legislation out there that we can talk to our people that we might have influence on about?
I'm not sure, to be honest. The only reason I know about this DOJ thing is just paying attention to the lawyers that are advocating. I'd say the person that has taught me more about accessibility, ADA, and all of this is Lainey Feingold. So I look to her to understand these kind of things, and a big shout out to her, because that's what this whole message would not have existed if it wasn't for Lainey. But honestly, I'm not like a super political person. I don't know that much about bills, but still working on it. Still trying to figure out who to talk to, and trying to push this. But I'm sorry, I can't answer that question intelligently.
So a couple minutes left in this session, Joe. Was a question that you were hoping you get asked, or any final thoughts for our participants in today's session?
Yeah, I mean, I'm like a super positive person, so it was difficult. This was a difficult one, as I said right at the outset, to share, because I just want to talk about positive things, and so I kind of view this idea of focusing on the Department of Justice. I'd like to view it in a positive way, and I'd like all of you to view it in a positive way, because if you can identify the source of your problem, or perhaps identify the solution, because this is really a solution, well, that's a good news, right? So let's look at this in a positive way. We know what we've got to do. Let's go out there and do it.
Well, thank you, Joe, so much for today's session. I really do appreciate it. And thanks to everybody who's attending. Friendly reminder, you can come back and watch this recording at any time. Please share Joe's message with your friends and coworkers, and let them know that they can see Joe's talk if they didn't get a chance to see it. I hope everybody's going to enjoy the rest of XCon. And Joe, thanks for making this a great session and a great conference just from your message alone. So have a great one. And again, thank you, Joe.
Thank you. Take care.